This past spring semester, I wrote a paper for a technology and human rights class. It's about white feminism because white feminism is the least grounded, white masculinity because that's the most fragile, and sex robots and how this will kill white society as we know it. It is a very kooky conspiratorial theory, and if you're into that, I think you'd really enjoy this paper. If you're not, I hope that you enjoy your day. Uh, Disclaimer: everything that I talk about is specifically talking about white people or whitewashed minorities who subscribe to mainstream culture, which is domineered by white culture. So the paper is called My Floppy Disk Became a Hard Drive. And here it goes. Incels, a linguistic blend of the words involuntary and celibate, are men belonging to a subculture defined by the inability to find romantic or sexual partners in spite of searching for one. Living in this sparkless state, also known as inceldom, drives these men down a hole of insecurity, resentment, and hopelessness. This hole is escapable only by breaking the chains of inceldom. To cope, they revert to online forums, websites, outlets, and even one another, and vent their sentiments among other men who can also relate. Incels have been around for 3 decades, but I believe their increasing popularity and reach of other men is a telltale sign of the changing dynamics between heterosexual men and women. Women's vocalized expectations of men are amplified across higher education, media and entertainment, the internet, and most recently, workspaces. At their core, many of these expectations are founded on a misguided perception of masculinity that aligns it with toxicity. Seeing that men are mostly focused on how they present themselves to women, they strive to meet these expectations, and in doing so, ultimately castrate themselves and rob themselves of their own masculinity. As a result, men evolve into a non-natural form of themselves that in turn renders them undesirable to women. What comes after is the abandonment of women and eventually their replacement with artificial companionship, currently seen in the form of sex dolls and artificial intelligence. The nature of masculinity is dominant to the nature of femininity. Both are natural and serve a purpose. The Huffington Post even goes as far to say as much. Now, this is not by any means to deny the existence of toxic masculinity, nor to suggest that masculinity is superior to femininity. I actually believe that femininity is superior. But this is certainly to establish one thing: masculinity and femininity coexist, seek each other out, and are natural and healthy. Yes, the practice of each takes different forms across different societies, but generally they stick to the same patterns of dominance and submissiveness. Yet, as hundreds of academics can tell you, science and academic theories are often misinterpreted when they become widespread. Many times, these theories find themselves inserted into mainstream conversations, where they are so watered down in the name of digestibility that they no longer mean what they were intended to mean. This is precisely what happened to the concept and theory of toxic masculinity, a force that has become so conflated with traditional masculinity that in many circles today they are actually the same thing. This perception, paired with the persistent championing of young white feminists' opinions of masculinity, has led white men and whitewashed men to repress themselves in hopes of conforming, in the hopes of swooning these women into their arms. It has also become trendy in the last decade and virtuous in the last 4 years to shame men, more particularly masculine men. Nowadays, it is no surprise to hear women describing their ideal man as one replete with qualities subverting traditional masculinity. This is obvious, especially given the recent way masculinity has been portrayed in the media, talked about online, and patrolled in classrooms and workspaces. Erin Pizzey, who in 1971 founded the first women's refuge in Britain with no money, no official or legal support, and only a run-down public housing block with 4 rooms, is one of history's most widely regarded feminist heroes. Her work permitted thousands of women to escape abusive partners and rebuild their lives, as well as claim welfare benefits, start divorce proceedings, and deal with alcohol and drug abuse. Her work has led to the creation of Refuge, which is today the largest charity of its kind across all of England with an annual income of 17 million. Today, Pizzey stands with the men's rights movement, stating that third-wave feminism is dominated by elite, privileged women. She states, quote, "Third-wave feminism is a lie and composed of women capable of extraordinary cruelty," end quote. Her goal is to heal the rift that feminism has created between men and women. Much of this rift is a result of this standard of new masculinity, whose premise is simple: do not dominate. This standard, again, is founded upon the pop culture understanding of masculinity, which is defined no differently than toxic masculinity. This simultaneously behaves as a punishment to even healthy masculinity. Prominent feminist authors Andrea Dworkin and Marilyn French depict as much, going as far to write that ordinary men are, quote, "patriarchy's brutal foot soldiers," end quote. This sentiment entered the mainstream, as can be seen with the terms manspreading and manterrupting, that explain normal human behavior with an expressed antagonism towards men. I say this because studies have actually shown that most workspace interrupting is done by women. It is important to note that this mainstream feminist narrative is one dominated and crafted by privileged white women or whitewashed women. Since men behave as they are conditioned to, they shed their masculinity. And because masculinity is sought after, they then become undesirable. Feminist women, unable to reconcile their natural affinity towards masculinity, grow frustrated and blame themselves for, quote, internalized misogyny, end quote. In Do Nice Guys Finish Last by Psychology Today, studies find a negative relationship between agreeableness and career and interpersonal success. Regardless of feminist beliefs that men should be less dominant, men who follow that standard are actually less successful and less desirable. The truth is that men with less social capital, i.e., physical attractiveness, charming personalities, well-earning jobs, etc., struggle finding women. Feminist movements and beliefs are causing men to become resentful. And in turn, these resentful men inspire movements like MGTOW, otherwise known as men going their own way, and the incel movement. Conditioned by forces of socialization, men are becoming something they are not, eventually embracing the new standard of masculinity based on misguided philosophies on what makes them attractive. Enter incels, men who blame women for their sparkless lives. Men, not allowed to express traditional masculinity, ultimately become toxically masculine. In the late 1990s, a lonely teenager, too inverted to find comfort in the real world, logged onto a web forum in search of a connection. He found people who could relate to him, people who were awkward in real life, especially when it came to sex and dating. The group soon grew into a community, and one that used the phrase, quote, involuntary celibacy, end quote, to describe their troubles. That lonely teenager is today a grown man. Online, he goes by username Reformed Incel, and he recalls the online incel world of the 1990s and 2000s very fondly, stating that it was a welcoming place and one where men who didn't know how to talk to women could ask the community's female members for advice and vice versa. In contrast, today's incels are routinely calling for acid attacks and mass rapes, and this is just one of the marks of a previously open-minded support group having become a place where praise for mass killers is tolerated and normalized. Reformed Incel says that rage has completely taken over. Incels hold an ideology called the Black Pill, which fundamentally rejects women for their sexual freedoms and labels them as shallow and cruel creatures. The Black Pill, taken to its extreme, has led to violence. Reformed Incel believes the deepest prejudices in society come out in new settings as a result of technology, which then manifests into real life and politics. Take Elliot Rodger, who in 2014 shot and killed 6 people, injuring 14, and called for a, quote, war on women, end quote, for depriving him of sex and choosing assholes over him. Christopher Harper Mercer shot and killed 9 people at his community college in 2015, leaving behind a written manifesto praising Rodger and lamenting his own virginity. Alec Minassian killed 10 and injured 16 in 2018 after driving a van into crowds of pedestrians, yelling, quote, the incel rebellion has already begun, end quote. When asked by a detective how he felt after killing those 10 people, Minassian explained he felt he accomplished his mission, going on to say that he knows several other men over the internet who feel the same way but are too cowardly to act on their own anger. A writer at Vox writes, quote, the focus on incels as potential killers risks missing an even more widespread and subtle threat, that they will commit acts of everyday violence ranging from harassment to violent assault, or simply make the women in their lives miserable, end quote. These men are not spawns of recent years. Instead, it is simply the case that the online platforms have allowed toxically masculine men to form communities and soon encourage violence against women to a broader audience and on an even greater scale. Many in this toxic frustration eventually decide to forego interaction with women altogether. Enter MGTOW, a counter-movement against third-wave feminism. MGTOW has men all over the world and across all national borders and religious divides consciously cutting women out of their lives. Toxic masculinity is slowly becoming widespread as even more men, stripped of their traditional masculinity, act out in resentment for trying to comply with the new masculinity standard. Now enter artificial intelligence. Humans have long engaged in friendly, professional, or practical interactions with robots in pop culture. The Star Wars franchise is a great example, considering one of the central relationships in the film is between Luke Skywalker and his robot buddies, C-3PO and R2-D2. Most recently in 2018, Solo, a Star Wars story, continued that trend, featuring a strong emotional bond between Lando Calrissian and his female companion L-337. When L-337 was destroyed in battle, Lando was shaken into mourning. In the real world, robots are making appearances in work and social spaces. A writer for The Atlantic explains, quote, self-operating machines are permeating every dimension of society so that humans find themselves interacting more frequently with robots than ever before, and often without even realizing. The human-machine relationship is rapidly evolving. Humanity and what it means to be a human will soon be defined in part by the machines people design. End quote. It is not an odd thing to consider an emotional relationship with a robot nowadays. The implications of these relationships for future social interactions are many. Each day, robots become more ubiquitous in human environments. Several researchers even caution the over-attribution of human qualities and intentions to robots. People sharing this sentiment are not conspiratorial or even on the outskirts of ideology. Elon Musk is one of the most prominent of these figures, going as far as to start a company called OpenAI, a research laboratory carving the path to safe artificial intelligence. In fact, scientists have identified something called the android fallacy, a tendency for humans to view robots as companions more than as tools, a tendency they say is seductive but dangerous. In our class, we discussed artificial intelligence and when it can become a being with rights and liberties. What happens, according to scholars, after they become viewed as beings is a change in the balance of control in the relationships between humans and robots. And this is precisely what Elon Musk hopes to avoid through his work on OpenAI, as he believes that artificial intelligence is, quote, the biggest existential threat to humanity, end quote. This worry is shared by AI scientists all over the world, and even world-renowned figures like Stephen Hawking. Robots have long been regarded as a threat to humanity because of their intelligence. But as their programming becomes oriented towards replicating and expressing emotion, they may very easily become viewed as companions, which is an even larger threat. Currently, we see robots with human qualities providing opportunities for interaction and convenience for the frail, disabled, and lonely. Robots can be a lot of fun, even for the able-bodied people with social capital. So, it's no wonder companies are already marketing companion robots capable of reminding us to take our medications, playing music and recording videos, and even interacting on a rudimentary level. Robots able to perform meaningful care functions like lifting and dressing humans are already in testing, and researchers suggest that it's only a matter of time until we move them into even more spaces with humans, more intimate spaces with humans. Given the aging of the American population, robotic companions are beneficial. But still, there exists the real danger of emotional attachments to machines that cannot reciprocate, but might just be able to manipulate. As AI gets smarter, it becomes easier for it to trick people, especially children and the elderly, into thinking that the relationship is reciprocal. Why would this powerful bond not exist between robots and incels? It already does, and in the form of sex dolls and chatbots. Men belonging to these movements can forego women all they want, but a desire for companionship and sex will always exist. So why would they not engage in relationships with robots? Let's not even look towards men holding extreme ideologies. What about our insecure or shy men who decide they no longer need to shoot their shot with women and risk getting rejected and humiliated, because they are guaranteed companionship with a robotic mate. For the past decade, Paul J. Zak, a professor of neuroeconomics at the Claremont Graduate University, has conducted studies on the maintenance of social media and real-life relationships. Zak has found virtually no difference at all, stating, quote, "The brain doesn't really differentiate between you posting on social media and you being there in person," end quote. He continues by explaining that humans are, quote, "such hypersocial creatures that we have a large release of dopamine when we're with other people, and that we can also get that release through Twitter or any social media," end quote. In one test, Zak asked journalist Adam Pennenberg to engage his Twitter followers for 10 minutes. Pennenberg used the 10 minutes to respond to tweets and make a joke about his GPS's pronunciation of words. Pennenberg's blood after this 10-minute exercise contained oxytocin levels of 13.2% higher and stress hormones 13% lower than they were before. Levels, quote, "similar to what a groom experiences before his wedding," end quote. In Japan, there is a dilemma of rapidly declining birth rates because otaku, a generation of males growing up in economic stagnation that, quote, "immerse themselves into their own fantasy worlds," end quote, have withdrawn from relationships with women. In 2010, the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare found that 36% of Japanese men aged 16 to 19 had absolutely no interest in sex, a figure that doubled in 2 years. These men are very familiar to the men of the MGTOW movement, except that they are not resentful towards women and simply believe themselves to be in relationships with virtual women. Women from programs that roleplay as romantic companions. One otaku says it's simply easier to have a virtual girlfriend than to have a real girlfriend. Incels, who view women as shallow and cruel creatures desiring only the top men. Men of MGTOW who have cut women out of their lives because of perceived complications and burdens placed on interactions and their masculinity created by the white feminist movement, and even everyday men with low self-esteem, insecurity, and low social capital will undoubtedly fall down this same rabbit hole. It is easy and highly realistic to envision a future where men are free to have sex and have difficulty finding a partner, so they instead choose to opt for a relationship with a highly realistic human-like robot powered by artificial intelligence. After all, the otaku was right. These machines do not eat, sleep, get pregnant, or need to be aroused. They are always at your service. Tech companies recognize this market. The sex robot industry is one of the fastest growing industries in the world. Companies like Real Doll offer sexbots designed from the ground up to meet a client's wishes. Harmony, one of the most technologically advanced sexbots, can blink, move its head, have conversations, and even comes with self-learning software that allows it to remember earlier encounters and conversations to offer better companionships down the road. These AI-powered sexbots are so customizable that they offer a choice of 10 personality types, from sexy to funny to kind to angry, and can feature any skin tone, facial characteristics, height, makeup, hairstyle, and bodily attributes the client wants. Many sexbots look like the average everyday person, while many others appear like video game characters with purple skin and claws. And as time passes, these sexbots will only become more sophisticated. All in all, The expectations of masculinity set by third wave mainstream feminism lead to conformity by men, which ultimately represses their healthy masculinity and makes them toxic. This is showcased by women's increasing rejection of emasculated men and men's subsequent reactionary movements all across the globe. The rapid growth of men sympathizing with dissatisfaction with women will lead to a future sexual abandonment, as we are currently seeing with the replacement of humans with artificial companionship. Simply put, we're going digital. That's the end of the paper. I hope that you enjoyed if you made it this far. Stay safe and thanks for listening.